Good morning. I'm sorry I've been away from my desk for much longer than I would have liked, and I want to thank everybody who has stepped up, in particular the First Secretary of State, Dominic Raab, who's done a terrific job.
Boris Johnson says cannot spell out how UK lockdown will ease. UK PM returns to work after severe case of coronavirus amid pressure as deaths rise and restrictions strangle economy.
But once again, I want to thank you, the people of this country, for the sheer grit and guts you've shown and are continuing to show. Every day, I know that this virus brings new sadness and mourning to households across the land.
After suffering from a severe case of coronavirus, Prime Minister Boris Johnson returned to work to the biggest dilemma of his premiership: how to lift the lockdown that is destroying swathes of the British economy without triggering a deadly second wave of the outbreak. Speaking outside Downing Street early on Monday, he said the government simply cannot spell out when or how restrictive measures will ease, but offered hope by adding progress was being made with fewer hospital admissions and that the UK was passing the peak.
And it is still true that this is the biggest single challenge this country has faced since the war. And I in no way minimize the continuing problems we face. And yet it is also true that we are making progress with fewer hospital admissions, fewer COVID patients in ICU, and real signs now that we are passing through the peak.
Johnson, 55, returns to work almost a month to the day since he was tested positive for COVID-19, which incapacitated the Prime Minister and threatened his life at the peak of the coronavirus crisis. Addressing UK businesses, which fear more economic weakness amid the lockdown, he said, "I understand your impatience, I share your anxiety. But we must recognize risk of second spike, of losing control of the virus. This is the moment of maximum risk." His government, his party, and his scientific advisors are divided over how and when the world's fifth largest economy should start to get back to work, albeit in a limited form, as the number of people who have died with coronavirus surpassed 20,000 over the weekend.
We are on the brink of achieving that first clear mission: to prevent our National Health Service from being overwhelmed in a way that tragically we have seen elsewhere. And that is how and why we are now beginning to turn the tide. If this virus were a physical assailant, an unexpected and invisible mugger, which I can tell you from personal experience it is, then this is the moment when we have begun together to wrestle it to the floor. And so it follows that this is the moment of opportunity. This is the moment when we can press home our advantage. It is also the moment of maximum risk, because I know there will be many people looking now at our apparent success and beginning to wonder whether now is the time to go easy on those social distancing measures. And I know how hard and how stressful it has been to give up, even temporarily, those ancient and basic freedoms: not seeing friends, not seeing loved ones, working from home, managing the kids, worrying about your job and your firm. So let me say directly also to British business, to the shopkeepers, to the entrepreneurs, to the hospital.
Johnson's deputy, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, said social distancing would in place for some time yet. The United Kingdom is on course to be among the worst hit European states, with more than 20,732 hospital deaths reported as of Saturday. But the United Kingdom's total death toll is much higher, as statistics for deaths outside hospital, for example in care homes, are slower to be published. The most stringent lockdown in peacetime history has left the economy facing possibly the deepest recession in 3 centuries and the biggest debt splurge since World War II. Richard Hordern, editor of The Lancet, tweeted, "Today the UK Prime Minister returns to work. His first task is not to decide when to end the lockdown. Instead, it must be to manage public expectations about the length of lockdown. He needs to speak to the British people today. Citing the example of Italy, which he said was following the Wuhan timeline, Horton added, "We must use May to see new infections and deaths continue to fall. We must use May to plan a recovery plan for the nation. We must use May to think about what kind of future we want." At the start of the outbreak, Johnson initially resisted imposing a draconian lockdown but then changed course when projections showed that 250,000 people could die in the United Kingdom. Since the lockdown was imposed on March 23, his government has faced criticism from opposition parties and some doctors for the United Kingdom's limited testing capabilities and the lack of protective equipment for some frontline health workers. Opposition Labour Party leader Keir Starmer, who has replaced veteran socialist Jeremy Corbyn, urged Johnson to set out when and how an economic and social lockdown might be eased, as did some Conservative Party donors. Simply acting as if this discussion is not happening is not credible, Starmer wrote in an open letter to Johnson.